And last but not least, our program, Rich Divers.
As I said in my introduction of my good friend Harry Lemoyne, today's program is kind of unique. Harry's son, Henry, called me a few months ago and indicated that there was a book that had been published about his grandfather, Harry Lemoyne Sr., and that the author lived in the Treasure Valley. So one thing led to another, and I ended up connecting with the author who's here with us today. The book is called From Harvard to Hagerman, and it's about Harry Lemoyne Sr., who was going to school at Harvard, was a world-class athlete, and then sooner or later ends up in the Hagerman Valley and is instrumental in sheep raising there. Our program today, Myron graduated from Northwest Nazarene College and has an MS at the University of Oregon. He embarked upon a coaching career that spanned 25 years, and I believe the coaching, Myron, was primarily basketball and track in the Treasure Valley. Interestingly enough, he's very familiar with a lot of the sports figures in Twin Falls and the Magic Valley since the 1960s. Myron founded the World Sports Humanitarian Hall of Fame, an organization that honors good people in sports. He and his wife Gwen reside in Nampa and enjoy their grandchildren in RVing. So would you please help me welcome Myron Finkbeiner to talk about From Harvard to Hagerman. Myron?
Thank you, Rich, and it's a privilege to be here today and see some friends from past days. And I want to recognize again Henry and Harry. Now, this is not Harry Lemoyne that I wrote about. If it was, he'd be 128 years old today. I want to thank Henry. He gave me a lot of human interest stories about his granddad. And then, of course, Harry kept me honest with all my facts and figures about his dad. As I mentioned, I started the World Sports Humanitarian Hall of Fame in '94. And so in 1994, I went to Vancouver, British Columbia to attend an international conference on directors of sports halls of fame. There were 117 directors there from around the world. In the opening session, we were having a luncheon, and we had our name tags on. And a gentleman across the table from me introduced himself. He said, "I'm the director of the World's International Swimming Hall of Fame in Fort Lauderdale." And he said, "I see you're from Idaho." I said, "Yes." He said, "We have an Idahoan in our Swimming Hall of Fame." Now, I grew up in Idaho, and we're not known for our swimmers. At least I had not heard of any. And so I said, "Well, what's his name?" He said, "His name is Harry Lemoyne." And I said, "Where's he from?" And he thought for a minute, and finally he said, "I don't exactly remember the name of a small town, but it's located on the Snake River, and they're known for their fish hatcheries." And I said right away, "Is it Hagerman?" He said, "That's it." Well, so he started talking to me about, and he said, and it's on the back cover of the book, that I consider Harry Lemoyne the equal of Jim Thorpe. And I was stunned, and I was speechless for about 2 or 3 minutes. And I said, "Well, tell me more." So he started telling me about this Harry Lemoyne that I had not heard about. And so on the way home, I told my wife, I said, "We're headed to Hagerman, and I'm going to find out if there are any Lemoynes still living in that area." So the very next week, I came to Hagerman, got a phone book, and I saw a Lemoyne. His name was John Lemoyne. So I called him up and I said, "John," I introduced myself. And he said, "Sure." So we went out and started talking about, I said, "Is your dad in the Swimming Hall of Fame?" He said, "Yes." And I asked him more questions, and he repeated, "Yes, yes, yes." And he said, "Let me go up in the attic and I'll pull out some pictures and scrapbooks and so forth." And so he did. So we spent the rest of the afternoon going through all these scrapbooks, and I could hardly believe what I was reading. And I told my wife on the way home, I said, someday, and I'm not a writer, I'm an old basketball coach, But this so fascinated me that I said, we're going to do some research on this and we're going to write a book. Well, then in the meantime, I got acquainted with Rick Riley from Sports Illustrated. And I said, Rick, you need to write a story about a book about this Harry Lemoyne. He said, well, he had just taken a job with Sports Illustrated, and he was in the middle of writing several books. He said, I don't have time. He said, why don't you do it? And so on the recommendation of Rick Riley, I started working on this book. Very quickly, the Lemoynes, their ancestors are from St. Lawrence River area in Canada, and in the late 1800s, the family moved to Boston, where they became neighbors and friends with the Kennedys. In fact, in 1996, part of the Kennedy curse, a Lemoyne Kennedy was skiing in Aspen, and he hit a tree and died. That's Bob Kennedy's son was named after the Lemoyne family. At an early age, the dad enrolled Harry in Brookline Sports Club and in school there. And it's a very famous swimming academy there in Brookline, and where he became an outstanding athlete as a high schooler. In fact, and I'm going to throw out some facts, and most of them you're not going to believe. Just the other day, I came across another book. I haven't even told Henry about this, but most of the things that I said in here, all the things I said in here, was verified by reading this book. As a high school junior, he tossed the shot put, the 16-pound shot put, 50 feet in practice. Today, if you look in the record book, you'll still see Harry Lemoyne holds the high school shot put record for the 16-pound. Now, the 16-pound they stopped throwing it about 1930. But in 1930, some 30 years after he tossed the shot put that far, his name is still in the record book because it's now down to 12 pounds. At the same time, he started swimming with the swim club, and he immediately became one of the top swimmers on the East Coast. In fact, before he enrolled in college at Harvard, he held every swimming record in America from the 25-yard sprint up to the 200-yard sprint. When he entered Harvard, they said at that time he was the greatest athlete ever to enroll in Harvard. And that was 1903 and 1904 school year. At Harvard, it was he participated on the Harvard team in 1903. It's ironical and newsworthy that was probably one of the most popular, most important year in college football, the year that he played for Harvard. Very quickly, he made the starting team. He played multiple positions. He was their kicker and punter, and I'll read some of his records, which are still being held at Harvard. Nobody's ever come close to his kicking records at Harvard since that time. But it is also the year that they lost 17 football players were killed that year. They considered the most brutal year in college football. And because of it, the coaches and others, Ted Roosevelt invited a lot of the coaches in to discuss how they could stop the brutality in football. And one of the things that they decided would stop the brutality was the forward pass. So in 1903-1904 school year was the beginning of the forward pass. The relationships that he had that year is unbelievable. You know who the manager of his team was that year? Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was the manager of the team that Harry played on. When they went to Army, there was a fellow a soldier, a West Point cadet, wanted to play football, but he was too small. So he was the SID for the West Point. His name was General Douglas MacArthur. So evidently, in Harry rubbed shoulders in some way also with MacArthur. Probably the most infamous play in football history occurred when Harvard played Carlisle. Now, Carlisle's Indian school, as most of you know. Their coach was Pop Warner of the Pop Warner football fame. He was the coach of Carlisle the year that Harry played at Harvard. That was the year that Pop Warner pulled out the hidden ball trick. All of you know what the hidden ball trick was? Another name was the hunchback play. Well, Pop Warner had these Indians, and when they played Harvard, they wanted to pull something that the Indians could pull off on the smart guys from Harvard. So, leading up to it, the week before, he had his wife sew a pocket in one of the football players' shirt, football jersey. So, now as far as I know, Harry was one that kicked the ball off because he was the punter and the kicker. He kicked the ball off to one of the runners from Army, and they all converged back on the goal line, all 11 of them. And when they were back there, they stuck the football on one of the guys' jerseys. When they broke out, all of them cradled this, they had this motion so that nobody knew who had the football. So they started going down the field. What was funny was the fans knew what was happening, and they were cheering, they were hollering and so forth and trying to say that guy had the football or he had it and whatever. They came right straight down the field, and as far as I know again, if Harry made the kick, he was the guy back on defense. He stayed back on the 10-yard line, and the guy with the ball hit it right for him. Well, Harry thought that he was going to block him, so he kind of moved over, and the guy went right across the goal line and scored. Well, after the game, of course, Pop Warner, they lost the game 13-10, but Pop Warner pulled a real stunt over the smart guys from Harvard. And as a result of that, the rules makers ruled that it wouldn't happen anymore, and they changed the rules. It was also the year that Harvard built their new stadium, and it was dedicated in one of the games. I think it was with Dartmouth. That stadium still is being used today, and it's one of the finest football stadiums in the country. And one of my bucket lists is to go back someday to see that football stadium, because it was Harry played in the opening game in that stadium in 1903. That year they were 9-2. They were 9-2, but the coach still got fired. And the reason I bring this up, because in the meantime, the next year, and I'll talk a little more about this, Harry boards the train in Boston and comes to Sun Valley, where he and his brother buys a flock of sheep. A year later, they brought in one of the most famous coaches in Harvard history. His name was Harry Reid. Not Harry. That's the guy from over here. Yeah, in Nevada. But anyways, Coach Reid, and when his first action that he wanted to do, he said, I've got to find Harry Lemoyne. Meanwhile, as I said, Harry dropped out of school after becoming an All-American football player as a freshman. He dropped out of school and they came west. 2 years later, and Harry Jr. gave me a copy of the letter from Reid, asking and trying his best to get Harry to come back and play football. That was his number one priority when he took the job. Well, of course, that didn't happen. At the end of the football season, he continued his swimming. And that spring at New York City, he started breaking world records in swimming. And it said, the New York Times said that every time that he swam, he broke his own world record. And he did that all through the spring. I could go on and on. A guy by name, probably one of the most famous football swimmers in the history, not Phelps, not Spitz, but a guy by the name of Charlie Daniels. Charlie Daniels later on picked up at least 12 gold medals. Charlie Daniels never beat Harry Lemoyne. Of course, Harry got him when he started out. He was young, but he never lost to Charlie Daniels, and because of that, the director of the Swimming Hall of Fame, that was the main reason why they inducted Harry into the Swimming Hall of Fame in 1988. It was after, unfortunately, Harry had passed away in 1983, was not able to go there, but I understand it, and Harry Jr. and John were stood in for their father. And at that time, the director said that was, of course, before Phelps and Spitz, but they said at that time, we believe Harry was the most outstanding swimmer in the history of America. Well, I need to quit here very shortly, but I did some research. In 1906, they tried to get Harry to come to St. Louis to participate in the Olympics. He said, it's too hot and humid. He said, I'd rather go to Canada. He turned down opportunity to go to the St. Louis Olympics. If he had gone to the Olympics, this is where I did a little research, he would have won a gold medal in the 50-yard. He would have won a gold medal in the 100-yard. He was the top captain of the water polo team for Harvard. That team that he played for won a gold in the water polo in 1906, so there's a third gold medal. He was also on the rowing team. In high school, the crew team beat Harvard's varsity, and Harvard's varsity was the #1 crew team in America. As a high school senior, he was on a crew team that beat Harvard, so he would have won a gold medal in the rowing. He would have won a bronze medal in the shot put. He would have won a bronze medal in the hammer throw. He would have won a bronze medal in the high jump if he had gone to the St. Louis Olympics. And I put 2 and 2 together, and this is one place where Harry thought maybe I was stretching a little bit. But the Olympics, when they came in 1984 to Los Angeles for the first time, it was on all over television. The year before, of course, he passed away in '83, but I couldn't help but think, for the first time, maybe Harry thought I made a mistake by not going to the Olympics. What's interesting is that some of these facts and figures that we found, even his family members did not know about. The year before I finished the book, I came to Hagerman, and I said, where are all the old ladies? Where do they have coffee every day? And they said, go down to the Shell service station. So we went down to the Shell service station, and sure enough, there was around a couple tables there. There were probably 8 or 9 old ladies of Hagerman. And I introduced myself. I said, how many of you know Harry Lemoyne? They said, which one? I said, the dad, the oldest one. And they all raised their hand and said, yes. He said, one of them went fishing with him one time. Another guy went pheasant hunting with him. Another one lived next door to him. Another one said, I went up against him when he was justice of the peace. He sentenced me to some kinds of thing that I did. I said, we all know him. Then I started saying, do you know that he was a world-class athlete, had world record? None of them knew it. Not a single one knew that he was the athlete. And so, he definitely flew under the radar. Just yesterday, I got this letter from the Midwest Book Review. And this is one of the top book reviewers in America, and this is the paragraph he writes. He said, there are truly magnificent stories that can go under the radar. From Harvard to Hagerman, Incredible Journey of an Unknown Athlete is a biography of Harry Lemoyne, athlete and humanitarian whose works crept under the rug of history. Myron Finkbeiner tells his story and hopes to bring him to modern light. From Harvard to Hagerman is a strong addition to any sports history collection. We recommend it. So that, I was very pleased when I heard that. Lastly, about 8 years later, and I'll finish with this, Rich. The Boston Globe, 8 years after he left Harvard, had a full article. Now, I'll just very briefly read a couple things. And this is all I quote the Boston Globe. In Harry Lemoyne, the former Olympic champion or champion swimmer and Harvard all-around athlete, the athletic world lost one of the greatest natural-born athletes this country has ever produced. There was not one single popular sport in which this modern young Hercules ever participated that he did not excel. At swimming, he was a peer of all sprint swimmers in the world. From the time he reached championship form, he was never defeated. He held all records from the 25 yards up to 300 yards for 4 years. When Lemoyne entered Harvard in 1903, he was looked upon as the greatest schoolboy athlete in the country. He played a great game against Penn Quakers as one of the leading tacklers. He did all the punting for the team. In the West Point game, his punt, now listen to this, his punts averaged more than 70 yards per kick. Now, in those days, the football was more like a rugby ball, more like a basketball. Can you imagine guys today kicking it that far? At throwing, listen to this, at throwing the hammer, Harry was very proficient. I have seen him throw the 12-pound hammer with one hand more than 155 feet. As an oarsman, Lemoyne excelled. He was a member of the Stone School Championship crew that won the Interscholastic Championship on the Charles River. Listen to this. In baseball, Harry could always put up a nice game, and when occupying the slab, there was not a man in Brookline High who could hit his curves. He would have pitched regular on the school teams, but for the fact that there was not a man in the whole school who could catch him. His speed was terrific. Once during spring football practice at Harvard, Harry had just told the coach to go to the, well, I'm going to stop right there, just keep right on going, okay? I'm going to finish with this. Henry told me this story. This happened when he was in the 80s. He would walk regularly around the track. And as during track season, and 2 shot putters from Hagerman High School was putting the shot, one of them got away and rolled out on the track right at his feet. So the kids apologized and they said, sorry, 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 and they start going out after the shot put. Harry picks it up, he's 80 years old, and tosses it all the way back to the ring. So, I could go on and on and on. You can't believe the people that he played with at Harvard. One of them was a great-grandson of Bradford, the guy in the English colonies. One guy was the ace pilot in World War I. Harry, unfortunately, Harry probably never knew what happened to all of his teammates. Every one of the teammates, they were on Wall Street, attorneys, big people in their companies and so forth. Harry came out and got sheep and herded sheep. So that's the story of Harry Lemoyne, and if it's about 5 minutes. If there are any questions, I can take them or come up and see me afterwards. And by the way, I just happen to bring a few extra books. If anybody would like to come up, and we'll get Harry Jr. To sign books and as well, and so do what you want to do. Thanks, Rich, for having me, and it's been fun being here.
Do we have any screenwriters in the room? I think this is an opportunity for a movie. Yeah. Does anybody know what the time period was that Jim Thorpe was active?
He came at Carlisle about 6 years after, so it'd be about 1910, 12, 13.
Did they ever have an encounter or a meeting, or they never crossed paths?
As far as I know.
Isn't that something? That's amazing. Yeah. Well, I'd like to be a punter today that could average 70 yards a punt. I'd be a multi-millionaire and then some. So, Rich, thank you for the interesting program today. Myron, Harry, thank you very much for attending today. We appreciate it much. Interesting stuff. Again, he has copies available, and I'm reserving one as I speak. I have the opportunity to do that, being up here at the microphone.